All right, you guys, so since this is a political video, I just want to say right up front that I appreciate people from all sides of the political spectrum. I have friends, I have family, some are Republicans, some are Democrats, and the most important thing is that we all just get along, right? And we dialogue and we debate things in a civil and friendly way, because the beauty of our system is that, we have all these people from all these different perspectives, and we get together and we form policies that are way better than what could exist if we lived in sort of a monolithic groupthink dictatorship, okay? So we can agree to disagree. I'll still be your friend even if you don't support my choice. But one of the beautiful things about these events that I've been to supporting RFK Jr. is that there is a mix of everybody. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, and we're all focused on the things that bring us together and really matter for our country instead of the small little culture war issues that drive us all apart. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and get started on the video. So the topic of this video is why I joined RFK Jr.'s new political party called We the People here in California. So there's the short answer and then there's the long answer. Okay, we'll start with the short answer and then go into the long answer after. Okay, the short answer is I want to get Bobby on the ballot here in California. Okay, and in order to do that, we need to get 75,000 people to register for the new political party called We the People. So I went ahead and did this back in January, and I'll walk you through the process of what it looks like. So first of all, you go to Kennedy24.com. And at the top, we have to get Bobby and Nicole on the ballot. And then depending on which state you're in, you may not have to join We the People. Okay, you might just have to sign or do a signature. Okay, but in California, we have to get 75,000 people to join We the People. So if you go to the state page here, okay, you can see how to register. You could read the FAQs. Let's go ahead and say how to register. Okay, and so I've already done this. Basically, you go to this website, which is the California government website. And even if you're already registered to vote, which I was, you click right here on this top one, which is register to vote now. Okay, and then at the bottom here, it says I was previously registered to vote. Okay, you click that and you put in your previous party and the address that you're registered to vote at. Okay, but then once you're done with that, you choose your new political party and you say, yes, my political party preference is other, and then you type in We the People. Okay, so then once you finish this, you'll get an email that looks like this. Okay, now depending on which county you're in, it might look a little bit different, but for San Diego County, this is what I got. And you have this affidavit number. Now it's an optional but encouraged step is to forward this email to californiavoter@teamkennedy.com, because then they can verify how many people have registered against, what the state government is telling how many people registered. So good extra little points here if you do this. And then a couple weeks later, you'll get a postcard in the mail. Okay, and it'll look like this, and it'll have your voter ID number and your party preference. And on mine, it said NPP, meaning no party preference, which kind of freaked me out because I wanted it to be We the People. But if you read the FAQs here, that's okay. Okay, it says right here, FAQ number 10. I registered for We the People, but why does my registration card say no party preference? Okay, and until we reach 75,000 people, it's going to be NPP. Okay. So anyways, that's the short answer. Why did I register for this party? Because I want to get Bobby on the ballot. This is the process. Okay. Now let's get into the longer answer, which is, well, why do I want RFK Jr. to get elected in the first place? So on the surface, you guys may think, oh, well, it's because he's friendly towards Bitcoin and blockchain. And, I've done some Bitcoin and blockchain videos, and therefore that's why I want him. And honestly, I think it's great that he's supporting blockchain, but it's like, not the primary reason I'm supporting him. And in fact, if he wasn't, I'd still support him. Because the real issue of why I'm supporting him is because I want to save the health of this country so that we don't bankrupt ourselves and lose our sovereignty. Okay, and I think that it's a real threat with the level of chronic disease in our country and the level of money that we spend on it, that if we don't have a president that is concerned about this and fixing it, then the United States will not be the United States that we think of. Okay, it'll lose its sovereignty, and we're no longer going to, be the most prosperous country in the world. So I'm all about health, and if you've studied any of the sort of interviews that I've done, or at least, the first interviews and some of the more personal interviews that I've done talking about why I'm interested in using Bitcoin, and I should say SV, right? Because BTC Bitcoin, that's not going to cut it with 7 transactions per second. But the reason why I'm using Bitcoin SV is to help improve the fruit supply chain so that we can improve the health of our country. Okay, and I've been consistent about this. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done on the protocol. This is a long-term project, but nevertheless, that's why I'm using Bitcoin. It's a means to an end of improving the health of our country. Okay, first by improving the fruit supply, and then by improving the health of our country. So let me go ahead and show some videos here so you know that I'm not just making this up, okay? So this is literally the very first words out of my mouth at a Bitcoin conference.
Kevin, a guy who I've spent some time with in Miami recently, and we've had a couple of good conversations. What's your story? How did you make it here to CoinGeek, Mr. Healy?
I am interested in creating systems that deliver super high quality fruit. Okay, so there you go, right? The very first words out of my mouth at a Bitcoin conference was, I'm interested in using the blockchain to deliver systems for delivering super high quality fruit, okay? And if you watch these other, and this was back, when was this? This was December 3rd, 2021. Okay, long before anybody has announced their run for presidency. So then, also if you read this or listen to this live interview that I did before at that conference, I talk all about these subjects. I go into a little bit deeper depth why the fruit is so important to me and that kind of stuff. And I also talk about some of the subjects we're going to get into later in this. And then finally, I think this video gives the most context of what I'm trying to prove here, which is in this Women of BSV interview, I was asked what motivates me. Okay, why am I interested in all this stuff I was talking about, vertical farming and app development and Bitcoin and all this stuff. So let's see what I say. Well, I think, imagine if you could have like super healthy humans. It's like if you look around in our food supply and just the percentage of the United States who's obese, it's just kind of sad, it really is kind of sad. And if you could improve the health of people, then imagine like not just the efficiencies in terms of, people being able to move around and stuff, but also like mental and creative efficiencies if people are healthy and they're not feeling so sluggish. In my moments, it goes in waves, but in my moments of like pure inspiration, it is that. It's looking about, imagine how much more productive and healthy you could have the country, and then all the wealth that we generate as a result of that. But yeah, it really depends on the day. Sometimes I can just, I'm more lazy than others, but in my moments of pure inspiration, I'd say it's that. Okay, so this was, last year. So the reason why I'm interested in Bitcoin SV in the first place is to improve the health of the country. Okay, this is something that I'm going to go into. I've been focused on for a little over a decade, ever since my brother died of cancer, and I realized how broken our medical system is And it polarized me into getting interested in natural health, experimenting with alternative diets, doing all sorts of weird stuff. And I feel like this little niche of improving our fruit quality is what I can do to help not just my own health, but my community health and the health of the country, okay? And the reason why this is so important to me is because I saw how broken our medical system is with the death of my brother. And also around that time was when Steve Jobs died. Okay, so we had Steve Jobs who had billions of dollars. Okay, if anybody could buy, the right medical equipment, it would have been him. Okay, and yet it still couldn't save him. Okay, so we have a broken medical system here. And it's also like barbaric and tragic to see what my brother went through and the different treatments and the pain and the, they literally cut off half of his tongue, right? This is like torture. You could think of like drug cartels where they cut off people's fingers and stuff. Like this was worse than that. And it was so bad and it didn't result in a success at all that it really got me interested in alternatives. Okay, and what I discovered and what we're going to get into is that the core problem is that we do not have free market capitalism in our healthcare system. Okay, we lost that in like 1910. And the only candidate that's talking about this is RFK Jr. Okay, so the real crux of the problem is that we lost free market capitalism in our medical system. Okay, we have crony capitalism now, and we do not have this competitive marketplace of ideas that results in the best healthcare for us. So let's go ahead and touch on a video where RFK Jr. explains this perfectly.
All of these agencies now in our government are now captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate, and they function essentially as sock puppets for those industries.
Yeah.
And, I've spent my 40 years suing them. And, but they've sold democracy down the river. Mm-hmm. And they're, destroying the infrastructure in our country. And they, the public health agencies don't do public health. Yeah. They're deep concern from the top. I'm not saying there aren't people in those agencies, including the CIA, who are idealistic and patriotic. But the top people in those agencies do not care. They are interested in one thing, which is corporate profit taking and serving the industries that they're supposed to be regulating.
So we have one force that's fairly inarguable, that there's an idea and a zeitgeist of profit at all cost, right? And this is what's causing all of this capture and all of the collusion between these different, it's just profit at all costs, even if that means risking human life. It's like profit above everything else. So there's a new God that's being worshipped, and it's profit. That's one thread that I think it's very hard to argue that exists. And that's what the corporate beast actually is built for. It's built to grow through profits. It doesn't have, a corporation by its nature doesn't have its own moral compass. It's not bound by their own connection to the divine. We're in worship of the God of profit and money. So we have that force at play. And I want to talk about potential other forces at play.
Let me comment on that.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm a capitalist. I believe in free market capitalism. Mm-hmm. What we have now in this country is not free market capitalism. It's corporate crony capitalism. It's not democracy. This wonderful interplay of democracy and free market capitalism that reinforce each other. What we have is our exemplary democracy has been essentially replaced by a system of plutocracy and corporate kleptocracy, and these corporations have been unleashed by captive regulatory agencies to strip mine our country, to commoditize our people, our landscapes, our waters, our children's health, and to make money for themselves. So, is the problem that corporations are greedy? To me, that's not the problem. Corporations are supposed to be greedy. Corporations are entities that are they have no morality and they are immortal. And I think it was Franklin who said, if corporations were angels, we wouldn't need regulation, but they're not. So we know what they are. And we don't want to change that. To me, listen, if you see Walmart or another big corporation bringing bottled water, pallets of bottled water down to the Katrina victims or, hurricane victims, they're not doing that out of altruism. They're not doing that out of philanthropy. They are doing that because that public act will, in their minds, accrue to greater shareholder value in one way or another, through goodwill or whatever. And if they're doing it for a genuine reason, like they just want to give away, something great with no reciprocal benefit, they could be sued by any of their shareholders, and the shareholder will win that lawsuit because the company is not allowed to turn itself into a philanthropy. It is not allowed to do true altruism. But knowing that, we would be nuts to let that company run our government because he's not running it for our sake. He's not. They're not investing millions of dollars in lobbying and political donations out of patriotic impulses,
right,
or out of a love for humanity. They're making those investments because they believe that they can change U.S. policy away from benefiting the rest of us, our country, and make it so it benefits their shareholders. And so it's crazy for us to let corporations run our government. And that is the problem, is that we've let them take control of our government.
Okay. So that sums it up pretty well, right? We have sort of crony capitalism, where corporations are setting the policy. Now, in the health agencies, this really, and we're going to get into this, has been going on since like 1910. Ever since the Rockefeller donations, okay? And there's things I love about Rockefeller. There's obviously some troubling areas as well. But most natural health people just rail on Rockefeller. I'm going to give a more balanced perspective, I think. But in this, it talks about how, corporations are not meant to be doing true altruism, where they're just giving things away and looking out for humanity, because that doesn't fit with their shareholders, right? Of course, we have B corporations that may have, like a mission. John Mackey with Conscious Capitalism talks about this a lot. But really, at the end of the day, the government and our democracy and people voting and setting policy, that's what's supposed to be setting the boundaries of what corporations can and can't do. And then corporations are supposed to be driven by increasing shareholder value. And that's a good thing because, look, a lot of things that we take for granted, like running water, electricity, toilets, napkins, okay, at one point, these were all super hyper luxury, right? In the feudal castles, they didn't have toilets. It was drafty, it was gross, and they just, had the turrets where they would, it'd be like a porta potty. So, it's a good thing that we have companies competing, and as they compete, they drive down the cost of things like electricity and toilets and running water and napkins to the point where they're so inexpensive now that most people, you could find these things for free. You could use a public restroom, you can get napkins at a restaurant. All this stuff is so inexpensive because of free market capitalism and because of corporations looking to increase their shareholder value and driving down the price through that process. So the problem is when corporations start changing the policy to favor them and eliminate that competitive element, right? And so that's really what we have a real problem with. Okay, so I want to show this one video where it talks about how we actually lost democracy before during the Gilded Age, and we were able to get it back through a populist movement. So let's go ahead and play that right here.
We lost democracy at one point in our history in the 1880s and 1890s. Our country was being run by corporate plutocracy, and it was John D. Rockefeller, the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Fricks, the Whitneys, and they all sat on interlocking boards for the Sugar Trust, the Rail Trust, the Steel Trust, the Oil Trust, etc. And at that time, there was no direct election of senators. So the senators were not chosen by the public. They were chosen by the legislatures. The legislatures were completely owned, the state legislatures, by Congress. I mean, by these guys. In fact, it was said that the only legislatures that you could not purchase, that could not be purchased, was the Pennsylvania state legislature, because John D. Rockefeller owned them all and he wasn't selling any.
Wow.
And so they would then pick the senators, and everybody from top to bottom was chosen by this group.
Didn't Rockefeller like bail out the entire country with like a check? Didn't you tell me this story? One of these guys, like the U.S. needed money, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll just write you a check."
The different time, but maybe during, I think a bunch of them actually came together. This was right before the Great Depression. They just dumped a bunch of money in the stock market to try to regulate it, but different than what we're talking about. But go on.
So then you had a confluence of these extraordinary events that happened. You had the rise in the countryside of the populist movement, which was democratic.
Can I just say one thing real quick? So when you have these people, the billionaires, the aristocracy, owning the legislative branch, they're dictating the laws in the country, essentially.
Yeah, they were dictating the laws, and they were also dictating the personnel. But I'll just do this very briefly.
I mean, so
you had two big movements that happened. One was Republican, one was Democrat. Populists in the countryside, they were organizing farmers, which were then a huge part of the population. The progressives in the city. And you had suddenly appear all these muckraking journalists who really changed America. Ida Tarbell, Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis, and many others. They were writing for a magazine called McClure's, and they started doing exposés on John D. Rockefeller and all the other robber barons. And America, everybody was reading those magazines. Everybody, the whole middle class was reading it, and there's a sense of indignation. And then you had one guy came along, Teddy Roosevelt, who was a member of the plutocracy, and he wasn't intimidated by him, and he got elected president and started to dismantle him, and they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, and he broke up the Standard Oil, the biggest company in the world.
Yeah.
They passed the 40-hour work week. They let unions start to organize. They gave women the vote.
Okay. So anyways, the point of this video is to show that there have been times in our history where we lost our, democracy to corporate capture, and yet we got it back. Okay, so these populist movements can be harnessed in a way if we can have the right leader to reestablish American values. So let me go ahead and talk about how during, sort of the whole lockdowns and everything, we lost so many of our rights, and it was showing how, democracy wasn't functioning. We weren't following the Constitution during those times, and he's very articulate. Let me go ahead and play these right now.
Well, these are some of the horrifying data, and I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. I want to talk about another issue, which is the close down of our rights. Not only did we start censoring people at the very, very beginning, and Hamilton, Madison, Adams said we put freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all the other all the other rights depend on that. If you give a government license to silence its critics, it now has license for any atrocity. So as soon as they knew they could censor us, as soon as they knew they could censor us, they then went after the other part of the First Amendment, freedom of worship. They closed every church in this country without any scientific citation for a year, without any notice and comment rulemaking. Democracy was simply abolished. They then went after freedom of assembly. They told us we had to social distance. They went after our property rights, the Fifth Amendment. They closed 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They got rid of Seventh Amendment jury trials. They said if you're involved with a countermeasure, no matter how egregious the injury you caused, no matter how negligent you were, no matter how reckless, you cannot be sued. And here's what the Seventh Amendment says. It says, no American shall be deprived the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in case there are controversies exceeding $25. Well, it does. There's no pandemic exception. And by the way, the framers knew all about pandemics, because there were two epidemics during the Revolutionary War. One, there was an epidemic, a malaria epidemic in Virginia that decimated General Washington's troops. There was a smallpox epidemic that disabled the armies of New England at the very moment they conquered Quebec, and they had to withdraw. Otherwise, today, Canada would be part of the United States. But between the end of the Revolution and the ratification of the Constitution, the 9 years, there were epidemics in every city that killed tens of thousands of people: cholera epidemics, smallpox epidemics in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, et cetera, malaria epidemics. They knew all about them, but they didn't put that in the Constitution. The Constitution was built for hard times. It wasn't built for the easy time.
Okay, so the point that I'm making with this video is that, the Constitution doesn't enforce itself. At the end of the day, it requires citizens who understand the value in it and are making sure that those are upheld, right? Now, the thing that I love about Kennedy is that, he grew up as a toddler. He was in the White House listening to conversations between his uncle and his dad. And he's so steeped in US history and part of this political dynasty where he really, truly represents American values, right? And so if we can have a leader that is also educating us through his speeches and through his fireside chats to the public about the importance of these rules and sort of reinforcing American values back into our culture, this is what we need, right? Because if we're being objectively honest, we lost democracy, right? So not only, were crazy things happening where, here in California, they shut down the beaches, they were arresting surfers, there's literally a security guard at the beach. Now, I go to the beach to get healthy. If I'm feeling a little off, I just go and I relax. That's how I get healthy. And they took that away from us, right? And they took away all this other stuff. They were shutting down businesses, crazy, crazy, crazy times. So we got a taste of what it's like to live in a tyranny, right? And that's not what I want to live in the future. So like he said, in the past, we've lost democracy and we've brought it back. And it takes a leader who, is not intimidated by the leadership because he's a part of it. Here we have Kennedy, who's been part of the political dynasty of the Kennedy family. He understands that sort of, ruling class type of people. And he wants to help us reinstill American values. So let me go ahead and play this clip that he did when he was talking about how populist movements can be harnessed for good or bad things, okay? So here's a good clip right here.
I think there's a revolution happening in our country. And it's the same kind of thing that happened when my father was running in 1968. The polarization, the division of Americans is the most toxic it's been since the American Civil War. That disconnect, there's a whole group of people in this country, the American middle class, 57% of Americans who can't put their hands on $1,000 if there's an emergency in their family. For those people, if the engine light comes on in their car, it's the apocalypse. You know, they're going to lose their car, lose their job. They're feeling forgotten by the Democratic Party. They used to represent the interests of the middle class. They're feeling forgotten by the entire political establishment. Donald Trump came in 2016 and said to those people, yeah, the whole thing is fixed. And that's what they wanted to hear. Populist movements can either be harnessed by demagogues for dark reasons and with using all the alchemies of demagoguery, or they can be captured by idealistic leaders and idealistic reason. My father captured most of the white vote in Maryland, Delaware, and the eastern states just before his death in 1968. 4 years later, those same people voted for George Wallace. Why is that? They were populist. My father captured them, that energy, with the powers of, and the
How would you
cause of
describe
idealism.
yourself? Are you a populist? Are you a nationalist? How would you describe
I
yourself?
would describe myself as a populist, but like my father was a populist for idealism, for the America's greatest, our signature values, for democracy, for free speech, for constitution, for a democracy that's not run and captured by corporate interests, anti-war, and for the middle class, for the cops, for the firefighters, for working people in this country, about rebuilding our middle class, about making sure our kids are able to live the American dream. The American dream when I was a kid said, if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could buy a house, you could finance it, you could take a summer vacation, you could raise a family, you could put something aside for retirement on one job. I have 7 kids, Aaron, and none of them believe that promise that applies to them. And why? And they're sick. Today, when I was a kid, juvenile diabetes, a pediatrician typically would see 1 case in his entire lifetime. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks into his office is pre-diabetic or diabetic. Why isn't the political establishment, we're spending more on diabetes than we are a defense budget. Why isn't the political establishment talking about this? We ought to be solving this problem.
So
why are our health agencies never even asking this question?
Okay, so perfect video, right? So populist movements can be harnessed towards, reestablishing American values, or they can be taken over by a demagogue where we can kind of have tyranny, right? So, and then he gets talking into the health issues, right? And this really, for me, is what is the most important issue with our country right now. So back in 2012, my brother died. Okay, he was diagnosed with cancer actually 2 years before that. And it started me on this journey back when he was diagnosed of doing all sorts of alternative diets and getting interested in natural health, because I was sitting with him in doctor's offices going through these treatments, and I saw firsthand how broken our medical system is. So I also did a lot of research on that, okay, and we'll talk about this thing. Let me go ahead and actually show you some photos from this time period so you get more context of what was, what I look like, what was going on. Okay, so anyways, this is me and my brother back in 2006. This was right when he was going on semester at sea, okay? And it's basically where you go on a trip around the world, and we were dropping him off. And so this is, before he left for that. And then about 6 years later, when I went on semester at sea, he was diagnosed with cancer, going through chemo and all this kind of stuff. And so I had changed my diet. I was doing basically, before that I was doing vegetarian. I was kind of shopping for myself, and then I became a vegan. But then once he got diagnosed, I got really interested in raw veganism, where you basically don't cook your food, okay? So then I left on semester at sea, and I was basically traveling all around the world, and I was looking at, all these places, what kind of raw food restaurants they had, what kind of fruit supplies they had. And I remember when I was in Ghana, So this is our third stop. I actually have the itinerary right here. So I was on semester at sea in fall of 2011. And you can see here we started in Montreal, which is where you just saw the pictures. We went to Morocco. And then when I was here in Ghana, this was when I started getting really interested in fruit. So this place where I stayed, the Lagasse Gardens, on the side of the cafe. Okay, this was like a little hotel cafe, and it was all vegetarian because I was seeking these places out because I was a vegetarian. And on the side of the building, it said, "The fruit of a tree yielding seed shall be for meat." Okay, Genesis 1:29. And I'm like, is that really in the Bible? Right? It talks about how, fruit is the food of man, basically. And I read it, I'm like, holy crap, it is. Okay, so this sort of planted the seed in my mind to start thinking more about fruit. Okay, and then went on our journey. Okay, we stopped in South Africa after Ghana. And so when I was in South Africa, I was going to all these raw vegan restaurants. This was one here in Cape Town. Okay, and I was, checking out all the different pizzas and snacks and all this kind of stuff. So I was like a connoisseur of all this. Okay, but then when I was in the Mauritius Islands, and we were traveling from the Mauritius to India. Okay, during this time, Steve Jobs, that was when he died. Okay, and so we didn't have internet on the boat, but I was a huge Apple fanboy, I still am. But when he died on this voyage right here, then I didn't know until I landed in India. And that's when we got the news that he died, okay? And so sort of as a tribute to him, it was the first time I tried fruitarianism, okay? And I'm not advising people do fruitarianism. I think the quality of our fruit is really bad, and you're gonna have some deficiencies even though you might excel in other areas of your life, okay? But that's a whole other story, okay? But nevertheless, here's a video, and I'm wearing pants, don't worry. But this is me talking about how I wanted to try doing fruit. Okay, and my voice is so bad in this, it's kind of embarrassing, but I'm just gonna play it anyways, just to show this point. So this is October 10th, 2011.
Gosh, look at all that. Got some oranges, pomegranate, and then I don't even know what those are. I think they're guavas.
Cherimoya.
Papaya, coconut, bananas, pineapple. I'm in heaven right now. This is amazing. So, I think I might go all fruit in India. It's just something I want to do, but we'll see. I don't know.
Okay, and so that was partly because I saw this, sign in Ghana about, the fruit shall be for man. It's in the Bible. And then, Steve Jobs was a fruitarian in his youth. And then he had just died, and I had just landed in India. And I actually took a plane over because I was looking for, vegan, vegetarian places. And so I opened one of the Lonely Planet travel guides, and I found, that there's actually the city, this state actually, Gujarat, but then the city within that state called Palitana, which historically was the most vegetarian and vegan population in the world. So anyways, I wanted to go check out this place, and so I went to this temple complex, the Jain temple complex on the top of the hill, which I'll talk about in this video. But this is October 11th, and I'm talking about how I was starting the fruit diet.
Look at that. Oh my gosh. Filled with fruit. That's it. Pretty fun. Got some more work on, and about to be on a 4-hour bus ride in a little bit, so I might take some fruit on that too. And then also, check this out.
So there's the newspaper where Steve Jobs had just passed, and I was talking about how Christian Bale was going to play him in a movie. And I thought that was cool, but obviously, you know, Laurene Powell, Jobs didn't like that, and they shut down the movie. And I've actually never seen the one that, who was it, Michael Fassbender or whatever did about him. But anyways, that it was in the newspaper. I remember there was like all these, you know, piles of flowers, and all around the city, people had made these like, you know, tributes to Steve Jobs and stuff. It was pretty crazy. But I wanted to go to this temple complex called Politana, and it's a bunch of Jain temples.
Sorry I didn't film any of the outside the city. Right now I'm in Ahmedabad, I think is how you say it. And I'm about to go to Politana, where there's like this hilltop. It's supposed to be just a sea of like old marble temples, so it's gonna be really cool. But
Okay, so then that's when I went to the top of this mountain, and there's all these Jain temples. Okay, now if you study Jainism, this, you know, the super strict monks would only eat fruit and parts of the plant that were above the ground, okay, because they didn't even want to kill the plant. So they wouldn't eat the root vegetables. They would just eat the fruit and other types of vegetables that you can get without killing the plant. So this is an old religion, and they just had the most beautiful, detailed temples made out of marble, okay, on the top of this really large hill. And so this was like a Jain Mecca, basically, where people would go to, as part of their, you know, religious sort of tradition, is they'd go to this place to visit. So I was doing all fruit at that time as a tribute to Steve Jobs, when I was at this place where there's this other religion, not only Christianity in the Bible, but it was talking about, you know, Jainism and how they were eating fruit. So these were started where these ideas solidified. So then after India, we went to Malaysia, and so here's a fruit farm I visited, and a Buddhist temple, and all this kind of really cool exotic fruit that I was eating all along the way. Okay, Angkor Wat. And so anyways, that about sums up my trip here. But the point of this is that I got interested in sort of natural hygiene and alternative health, okay? And at that point, when I got home, I wanted to teach people how to eat a raw food diet, okay? I didn't sustain the fruitarian diet. It lasted about a week, and then I went back to eating nuts and seeds and stuff, which is probably healthier in today's world with our fruit quality. But since then, I have gone through longer periods where I have experimented with that. I think the longest I did was a year on just fruit back in like 2017, 2018, which also happened to be when I basically like won the lottery with my Ethereum investment. And so it was all very kind of weird. But anyways, so when I got back, I went ahead and I wrote this book called Simple Raw Food. Let me pull it up here. So this was published in October 12th of 2012. And I also had the digital version, which was published a few months before this, okay, the iBook, where it had the videos explaining how to do the recipes and stuff. Now this didn't sell that well. I think in total, especially with the digital version included, I made like a couple $1,000s, but it was a cool thing, and it shows that, you know, this is what I was passionate about. I also, around that time, got interested in investigating what happened to our medical system, because the year after I got back from semester at sea, my brother again went through all these sort of experimental procedures and ended up dying. And so I felt that our medical system was broken, and I wanted to figure that out, okay? So this interview right here really sums up everything really well. So let's go ahead and play this.
Doctor, cancer still is such a big issue in this country. Why is that the case, and why are people still getting it at an alarming rate?
Because we've taken the wrong dog to the hunt. And it's illegal in the United States for anybody but an MD to treat cancer. And the MDs who go outside of the box, like there's a doctor in Texas, his name is Brzezinski. He has a very unique way of treating brain cancer. And I don't know how many times he's had to go to court to defend himself, right? Which is why there are no alternative, quote unquote, cancer treatment centers in the United States anymore. They're all in Mexico or Sweden or wherever, because in the US you can't treat cancer unless you're an MD. And that's a problem. And so we've taken the wrong dog to the hunt. Now remember, right, from the proper perspective, everything makes sense. Your medical doctor doesn't know what's best for you. They only know what they've been trained in. And in this case, they've been trained in allopathic reductionism. Allopathic reductionism doesn't care about the causative factor of disease. So MDs, bless their hearts, don't even know how to cure heartburn. They can't cure it. They can manage it. To the profession that does not even know how to cure heartburn, we have given $600 billion to come up with a cure for cancer. Gee, I wonder why we aren't any closer to a cure for cancer than we were when Richard Nixon declared a war on cancer, right? It's because the tumor is not the disease, it's the result of the disease.
Okay, so I'm just going to skip forward a little bit for brevity here.
Cancer treatment is so bad, our outcomes are so unbelievably bad that the American Cancer Society had to move the goalposts. And they stopped talking about a cure. Now it's 5-year survivability. And everybody in the United States buys it hook, line, and sinker. There was a famous study done in 2004, right? The American Journal of Clinical Oncology. They collected, I think, 11 years of data, right? And they looked at adults who had developed cancer and were treated with chemotherapy. And what they found and published in the American Journal of Clinical Oncology, 97% of the time, chemotherapy doesn't work. It doesn't work. So if the MD medical community is all about research and double-blind this and double-blind that and, let's prove it, why is chemotherapy still being rolled out? Because it's been proven to be ineffective, doesn't work. So why on earth do they do it? Because it's a gigantic moneymaker. It's gigantic money. It's gigantic money. And it's a problem because, we don't have a free medical market. And when you're the king, you can do whatever you want. And so cancer treatment fails, cancer treatment fails, cancer treatment fails, cancer treatment fails, cancer treatment fails. And we keep going back to the MDs because we don't have any other option. And quite frankly, when you've been pinned with a definitive diagnosis of cancer, you're afraid for your life.
Yep.
Your medical doctor could tell you to jump off the roof of the hospital, and it's part of the treatment, and most people would do it.
Okay, so this touches on something really important, right? And he was talking about how we don't have a free medical market in the United States. So this is his book. It's called The MD Emperor Wears No Clothes. And in the prologue, it talks about the history of this. So I'm going to go ahead and read you just a quick paragraph here. It says, in the 1800s and early 1900s, the medical marketplace in the United States was quite different than it is today. The naturopaths, the chiropractors, the osteopaths, the herbalists, and the allopaths, also known as MDs, were all vying for patients, recognition, and turf. Many times the competition between medical practitioners from the different camps would even spill over into violence. Even though there was a lot of competition in those days, the medical playing field was relatively level, and nobody really had the upper hand. In the second decade of the 20th century, 1910 to 1920, there was a dramatic shift of power in the medical arena, and everything changed. Okay, and he talks about the Flexner Report and the donations by Rockefeller and the Carnegies. Okay, and it said, and I'm gonna defend Rockefeller a little bit, but he basically said that, based on those donations and the systems they set up, it said by 1920, the medical turf war game was over and the MDs were squarely in the driver's seat of medicine, and they have been there ever since. Most Americans, being unaware of these going-ons, mistakenly assume that MDs are in the driver's seat of medicine because their treatments are better than those of their competitors, like the herbalists and like the, all these other people, the naturopaths and the chiropractors and the osteopaths. But the MDs are not in the driver's seat of medicine because the treatments are better than those of their competitors. They're in the driver's seat of medicine only because of the financial coalitions that were organized at the turn of the 20th century. Okay, and says, now at the beginning of the 21st century, we are in the middle of a healthcare crisis in the United States because all of Flexner's kitchens have finally come home to roost. If you do not think that we are actually in a healthcare crisis, consider the following. The leading cause of bankruptcy is the high cost of medical care. The leading cause of harm is MD-directed medical treatments. The third leading cause of death is medical errors. The U.S. spends almost 3 times as much per person on healthcare as every other industrialized nation in the world, and we are second from the bottom in terms of the health of our citizens. Okay, so anyways, this goes on, and it's a really good book. I recommend reading it. But let's go ahead and address this issue of Rockefeller and the donations. So I got interested in this subject and I wanted to get a balanced view. So I was reading about Rockefeller and his perspective on this. And I'm going to pull up the digital version here on my computer. Okay, so let's go to chapter 23. So this is the chapter where it talks about Rockefeller and his donations. Okay, so the first part of the book talked about sort of his ascent, and then it talks about his giving away money. So there's a few quotes in here that I want to show. Okay, so here's the first one, okay? So basically, Rockefeller had concentrated so much wealth, he had so much money, that he obviously needed a team of people to sort of dispense of this wealth. And one of the people was Frederick Gates, not related to Bill Gates, somebody else. But this guy is really responsible for the donations when it came to medicine. And the interesting thing is that him and Rockefeller disagreed on how this money should be dispensed. Okay, and Rockefeller was actually, I'm going to show you, was into more of these alternative treatments and these what we would call today as alternative medicine. He actually practiced that, and he disagreed with Gates about it, and yet this donation by Gates was what instituted what we think of today as modern medicine. So here's where it talks about Gates, right? He says, while the author delineated the symptoms of many disease, he identified the responsible germs. Okay, so Gates was reading this book that was talking about basically this guy talking about the germ theory. Now in natural health, you have the germ theory and you also have the terrain theory. So it talks about how the germ theory is really kind of a half-truth, right? Sure, there might be these microorganisms that spread disease, but why is your body letting them in the first place? And that comes down to your own health and your diet and your lifestyle and that kind of stuff, okay? But Gates was learning about all these little microorganisms, and the idea is that if we can isolate these microorganisms and then kill them, then we can prevent disease, okay? And so this ideal, this sort of way of thinking, this philosophy of medicine was then elevated drastically by this concentration of wealth that was donated by Rockefeller. So here I want to talk here about the disagreements between Gates and Rockefeller. So it said American medicine was embroiled in open warfare between two schools, allopaths and the homeopaths. Now, in reality, it was even more people, like we talked about in this book, but for the sake of this is good. Okay, and it talked about how Rockefeller favored homeopathy. Okay, and Gates thought they were both pseudoscience, and anyways, but let me go ahead and skip forward to these other things to prove my points. Okay, in this one, I wanted to make the point that Rockefeller never even used his own, research that he funded for himself. He was hardly part of it. He didn't want to go inside, and they had, special rooms. So 4 rooms on the top floor were reserved for the Rockefeller family, but Rockefeller Sr. never took advantage of this privilege, despite Gates' constant urging. Okay, but Rockefeller stubbornly preferred his osteopaths and homeopaths. So that's interesting. And then down here it says, when Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, met Rockefeller in 1912, he recorded this impression: he is almost exclusively preoccupied with his bodily health, thinking of different medicines, new diets, and possibly new doctors. And his golfing buddy was a champion of homeopathy, and it says right here that Rockefeller nearly refused to provide a $500,000 check to repair the Johns Hopkins Medical School after it was partially destroyed by a fire, simply because the school refused to recognize homeopathy. Okay, and then Gates dismissed the work of homeopathy. It's a wild lunatic, whatever. And so there was this big disagreement. But Rockefeller eventually just, he was retired at this point, and he just didn't put up the fight to correct this. Okay, so it says, it was deeply ironic that Rockefeller retained such residual faith in homeopathy, even as he financed the world's most sophisticated medical research operation. Periodically, he had spasms of irritation, firing off letters on the need to save homeopathy, but these outbursts quickly passed. Through his philanthropies, Rockefeller did more than anyone else to destroy homeopathy in America. And in the end, he seemed powerless to stop the scientific revolution that he himself had so largely set into motion. Okay, so this is something that's really important to understand, right? That Rockefeller was conflicted about these donations. And the interesting thing is that all these other forms of medicine, okay, were, they weren't elevated like this sort of MD science was that he talked about in here. And so right now, all the natural health people kind of fit this mold of what it talks about right here. It says, at the time, the concept of a medical research institute was still alien in America. The country's medical schools were mostly commercial operations taught by practicing doctors who picked up spare money by lecturing on the side. Standards were so abysmal that many schools did not even require a college degree for entry. Since these medical mills had no incentive to undertake serious research, medicine hovered in a twilight area between science and guesswork, right? And so the people that I've followed in the natural health kind of fit this description perfectly, right? And so they don't have an institute that is interacting with government. There's just these sort of individuals. Some people have amazing stuff that works, but it's kind of, a little bit sketchy around the edges. And there's no way for these solutions to participate in a free market, because you have this institute that's basically, following the germ theory of disease that is interfacing with government, right? And so let me go ahead and play this clip just to talk about how Rockefeller was sort of a new age health nut really quick.
Was Rockefeller Sr., John D. Rockefeller, when he died?
He was nearly 98, and in fact, in the early 1900s, he announced that he planned to live to the age of 100. And one thing about John D. Rockefeller, when he set his mind to doing something, he had an extraordinary ability to focus his mind on goals. And he almost always achieved them, so that he was nearly 98 when he died, so he very nearly made good on his boast that he would live to 100. And he became something of a new age health fanatic, and he had all sorts of theories in terms of how he could prolong his life. For instance, this was the bane of his luncheon companions, but he used to chew food 10 times before swallowing. And guests who observed him closely said that even when he had liquid in his mouth, he would swirl or sift it 10 times before swallowing. And what it meant was that people who were absolutely thrilled to be invited to the luncheon table of the world's richest man found themselves, after 20 minutes, finished with their own food, and for the next hour watching John D. finish his. Well, maybe there was something to this masticating of the food, because he very nearly lived to 100.
Okay, so anyways, this is just to give a little bit more complex of a story about Rockefeller. Okay, in many ways he was what we think of as a New Age health nut today, and it's just very ironic how the money that he gave away created the industry that has really disadvantaged all of these alternative forms of medicine. So the thing that I love about Kennedy is that he's supportive and understanding of how these agencies have been captured, and he can start to unwind some of this, lack of a free medical system. So at the end of the day, it really has to be all of us, though. It can't just be one person, because it needs the support of the masses. But let me go ahead and now play a clip from his vice president pick, who I think is great. I had no idea who she was until the announcement. I thought he was going to pick Tony Robbins, because I had listened to one of Tony Robbins' tapes back in the day called The Power to Shape Your Destiny. And it talked about how he wanted to be president one day. So I thought he was going to do this vice president role to get himself set up. But instead, Nicole Shanahan is his pick, and I think it's a great pick. So let's go ahead and listen to this little clip of the interview where she expresses all these same beliefs that I was talking about. And it's perfect, okay? I'm so supportive of this.
In speaking with some of the experts, and like, a lot of our frontline healthcare professionals are getting really burnt out. Like, I've talked to OBGYNs that are just cracking right now, because they're seeing, women who seem healthy that are really struggling to carry a pregnancy to full term. Like, I'm seeing pediatricians who have major client books of pandas, like, and like, to the extent that it becomes now the majority of their client base are kids with chronic disease.
It's not just kids, adults also, a major chronic disease problems with incredibly high rates of obesity and overweight, diabetes at astronomically high levels of the adult population. Of course, Alzheimer's disease, a whole range of real severe problems that are afflict just an incredible fraction of the American population.
It's devastating. It is devastating this country. It's devouring this country from the inside. And so this is the moment in history that, like, every single campaign should be focused on this issue. And I think that, the way that Bobby has been talking about it and thinking about it, and has dedicated his whole career is trying to understand what is causing the rate of chronic disease. We can keep throwing taxpayer dollars at more and more drugs and more hospitals and more doctors. But, like, if that is to treat an ever increasing number of patients with chronic disease, it will put us into everlasting debt and put us into an everlasting economic crisis that we won't be able to pedal out of. So we can't continue on this track. We all know that. So the question is, so then what? The then what, to me, is very, very clear. We need to investigate. We already have early evidence that, like, glyphosate, this one's like low hanging fruit, right? Many countries in Europe have banned glyphosate use. We need to ban glyphosate use.
It's like a pesticide used to grow genetically modified foods.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then we need to start understanding how to get each and every home in this country clean water that isn't just dumped full of chemicals to eradicate
I mean, it's not that
microbes.
long ago.
Okay, so anyways, so she talks about getting rid of pesticides and getting clean water to people. Okay, this is going to be a tricky transition because I think so much of our farmland is dependent on this glyphosate use that it will be, you can't just ban it all at once without causing severe economic damage and possibly starvation. But nevertheless, this is what we need to work on. Okay, I haven't eaten like wheat and any GMO wheat or corn or any of this stuff in a long time. Okay, so I think that this definitely is a really good path. But again, it's a tricky transition. How do you go about making sure that we maintain the food industry while this transition is happening and we don't have mass starvation, right? So, and then clean water, obviously, low-hanging fruit. Why aren't we, having better filters and stuff in the home? This is all the stuff that when I was interested in health, I got, right? I don't use plastic bottles whenever possible. These are things that, imagine if we had a government that was telling us about this and incentivizing, instead of, giving corn subsidies, incentivizing other industries that are better for health, or at least just getting rid of all the subsidies to begin with, so that we can have a level playing field, right? So you can see why I'm so supportive of this campaign. It's completely in alignment with a lot of my values. So now let me go ahead and show you some of the pictures from the campaign events that I've been to. So the very first event that I went to was actually where this guy showed up with a bunch of, guns and knives in his backpack. It was on Wilshire, a couple blocks away from where his dad was assassinated. So I think it was like in everybody's head, in the back of their mind. And we sort of like attracted this, cooperative component, law of attraction style. But luckily, the security guys got him and everything was fine, okay? But I honestly had no idea the guy was there. I was just sitting watching the mariachi band playing for like a little bit too long. I'm like, gosh, this is going on for a long time, an hour and a half of mariachi band. But little did I know that they were dealing with this guy outside. Okay, and then Kennedy popped in. So first time I've ever seen him in person, through the side door, and came up and gave us a speech about how we want to have, wide gates but tall fences, and was talking about Cesar Chavez and the pesticide use and all sorts of different stuff. So then I was able to get a picture with him, right? So here's everybody behind me. He literally took a picture with like everybody in this thing. So I just had like, 2 seconds with him. I just said thank you, and then that was it. And I figured that would be, that would be the only event I went to. But I started getting text messages saying, hey, there's going to be a private dinner in Bel Air and Mar Vista. Would you be interested in coming? And I was like, yeah, I'm interested in coming, but it was pretty expensive to attend. And I was busy that week, and so I wasn't able to make it. But then there was another opportunity where there's an event in Newport, which is a bit closer to me here in San Diego. And so I ended up going and meeting him, where I was able to talk to him for a little bit longer. And so I was able to thank him for taking on the regulatory capture over health agencies. And I was telling him about how my family has been devastated, not just with my brother, but other issues based on the pharmaceutical industry. And I was so appreciative to him, and I was able to express that. Okay, I never even mentioned Bitcoin because, again, it's like, doesn't matter to me. It's like 5% of the issue. If Bitcoin disappeared tomorrow, I would just focus on vertical farming and greenhouses and robotics and all this other stuff that could also improve the health of our fruit supply chain. So I think it's great that he's supporting Bitcoin. I think that it's wonderful, but it's not the primary reason why I'm supporting him. So then he gave us a little speech. And then it's funny because you can see here I'm wearing my shoes, right? My toe shoes. And I wore them because he was talking about how you know, he doesn't like wearing shoes. I never have. There was this TMZ appearance where, you know, he was walking barefoot on a plane, and TMZ caught him doing that, and it went viral. And so this is why I was wearing those shoes. Let's listen to this real quick.
I want to ask you about something that's kind of gone viral here. You've leaned into that barefoot video on an American Airlines plane, Americans based here in North Texas. And you had your own little response to TMZ the other day on that flight to Dallas. Well, why were your shoes off?
I don't like wearing shoes. I never have.
You have them on in this interview, though, here.
I know, it's painful. I was going to take them off, and I don't want another video out there right now.
Okay, so anyways, so I forgot to say that the first thing I said to him actually was, you might like wearing these shoes, okay? Because that was just on the news, and I've been wearing these shoes for a long time. And so I was actually at my parents' house before I left to this event, because they're a little bit closer to the where the event was, and my dad, as I was walking out, said, "Kevin, you look improper," okay? Because I was wearing these shoes. And so then my mom ended up buying me these dress-up shoes that still have the 5 fingers. And so then when I went to another event here in San Diego, I joked that, hey, I got some, you know, dress-up shoes now. And so the lighting was really bad in this, but it looks like I have raccoon eyes. But so anyways, I saw him again here in San Diego. And then the final event that I've been to visit him was in Union Station when he was celebrating Cesar Chavez. And I just was able to talk to him for a little bit and thank him. So anyways, that's sort of the story. It's why I'm supporting Kennedy. And let's get Baudry on the ballot, all right? So if you haven't registered already, and you're in California, go ahead and register for We the People, get your confirmation card. If you're in another state, then go ahead and sign, and let's make this happen, all right? I'll see you in another video.
We were once a free and thriving nation, the healthiest and strongest in the world. What we once were, we can be again. How do I know that? It's because everywhere I go in this country, I see a profound determination among Americans to heal. We might have become the sickest country on earth, but we also have the most ingenious healers, both inside and outside conventional medicine. We may have sky-high levels of depression and addiction, but we also have innovators who have opened up new frontiers in recovery. We have some of the world's most depleted agricultural soils, but also some of the world's most innovative and energetic regenerative farmers. We have serious economic problems, but we also have the brightest and most ambitious entrepreneurs. We face hunger and homelessness, and yet we meet it with the highest philanthropic rates in the world and bottomless kindness and compassion. We may be on the mat today, but we can be on our feet and happy and healthy and strong again with good leadership tomorrow. Our people and our system were built for resilience. And here's the most important thing I want to tell you about the state of our union. Our nation seems more divided than ever, but Americans everywhere want to heal that divide. Our nation has become artificially divided by political forces that can survive only when we, the people, are at war with each other. People are tired of being manipulated by fear. We learned that lesson during COVID. We recognize that the same techniques of manipulating fear are being used by elites today to corral us into voting for one political candidate or the other. Americans are tired of these dire warnings that to preserve democracy itself, you better vote for our guy. I can tell you that in every state of this union, people are rejecting fear-mongering. 80% of Americans say they don't want to be forced to choose in this election between the lesser of two evils. They're tired of voting against something or someone. I see it in the crowds of mixed Republicans and Democrats and independents who attend my rallies, that a growing number of Americans are rejecting divisiveness. They're ready to unite, to rebuild this country, and to fulfill the promise of the America of my youth. They're ready to vote for something and for someone they like, for someone who represents hope and healing, or someone with an inspiring vision for America's future, for a future that they can believe in. So that's the State of the Union that I want to bring you today. It's a nation that hungers to heal. It's a nation ready to face reality, to rebuild, to end the forever foreign wars, to clean out the corrupt Washington establishment, and to turn again toward peace, freedom, good health, and prosperity. When we unite in that vision, we're going to be unstoppable. Thank you, and God bless you.